afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's Santosh me. Few of you who are inside the hall will have some challenge to keep awake. And I hope if you remain awake, you will be added some value. To my right is Dr. Upinder Kaur. Doesn't need any introduction. A cardiologist par excellence, brilliant teacher, researcher. I think I'll stop here because if I start describing him, the session will be lost in only describing his introduction. The session theme is right now on how health insurance can bring equity in healthcare delivery to the masses. So one may wonder what Dr. Upinder Kaur is going to talk, and that too as a keynote address. I think he is coming out with something spectacular, and he was keeping it under wraps. When I requested him, can I get some gist of what you are going to say, so that I can introduce, besides you, the topic that you are going to cover. He is going to talk about something on coronary stenting, which is the, I would say, the flavor of the country.
Please take your seat. Please take your seat.
In matter of both delivery and receiving it, what should not be there and when should stenting not be done. So coming out from a cardiologist is something which is really, I would say, one should look forward to. And he is going to present some insights how this study that he is going to share with us can link into and help us in insurance, from the health insurance perspective, in bringing top-end cardiac care to every area of the city that we have up to the rural market. Dr. Mandapati, should I going to come up here?
Thank you very much, Dr. Praneeth. It's a pleasure to be here. And I thought that, as a cardiologist, what can I contribute to this particular aspect of healthcare delivery and insurance, which I think is very important. I'm sure you all are aware that these days in the newspaper there is a lot of controversy that anybody who goes to a hospital with a chest pain is asked for an angiogram, and if anybody goes for an angiogram, at least a stent is put in, if not bypass surgery. So is there any way in which this could be checked, short of auditing and arresting some people and taking away the records? It's a very unpleasant way of doing it. So I'm going to talk about basically a new method which is very simple, and I'm sure that it's so simple to understand that all of you will be able to understand it, which should be a part of our cardiac cath lab. And I would also go up to the extent of saying that unless you have that in that particular hospital, especially in those patients where you're using multiple stents, that hospital should be, told to have it. Otherwise, wait for the decision till the time angiogram goes to a panel, not reimbursed. So I think that is makes a lot of sense to me with this august audience. Now we know that coronary artery disease and ischemic heart disease or cardiovascular disease as a cause of death is very, very challenging thing. And as you would see that in many other parts of the world, the global burden and this being as a cause of mortality is decreasing, although modestly. Like you see North America, from 44.6% of all the deaths being cardiovascular, is supposed to be coming down to about 42%, at least 2% total decline, which is a big decline in numbers. Similarly in Europe, Western Europe is coming down from 55% to 53%. But unfortunately in our country, it is projected that from 23% of the deaths being from heart attacks and related illnesses is going to increase by 10% by 2020, which is very alarming. And the solution to this cannot come from a cath lab. Solution from this has to come from lots of things, lot of measures at the level of healthcare, primary healthcare, people becoming aware of their hypertension, people becoming aware of their diabetes and treating it. But then some of the things which I'll be speaking about also will contribute to this. The other problem which this region has is diabetes. And diabetes, as you know, is a very important precursor of heart disease, vascular disease. There again you would see, globally, diabetes is increasing everywhere. If you see, in North America, the projection was that by 2010 there would be a 35% increase. Similarly, in Europe, about 50% increase. In Africa, 93% increase, whereas in India, it is 111% increase. This is not projected, but it's already happened. That in the last 15 years, we have seen a 111% increase in the incidence of new cases of diabetes, as compared to only 35% in United States. Increases is all over. So all this makes our job very, very challenging. We know that we have the largest number of people dying because of heart attacks and related illnesses in the world. WHO estimates that we will have the highest number of patients with heart attacks in years to come. We already are the diabetic capital of the world. Maximum number of patients with diabetes in numbers you will find in India. China is contesting that. They say that we have more. But still we're lucky. We are at least on the top of them, at least in diseases. And ischemic heart disease is responsible for about 33% of deaths in India. Other thing is that, which is very relevant, is that in our population, heart disease occurs at least 10 years earlier than in Western world. 40% of our patients are less than 40 years of age. Any country, you would see that if you look at the population below age of 40, only 4% of them would have heart disease. Here it is 40%. You go to any hospital, go to any CC, you will see a 32-year-old, 28-year-old person coming with a heart attack. That is one problem we are facing. The other problem we are facing is that because of better health delivery systems, our average age is increasing. It's no longer in 50s, it's 62 or 63 or 64. So we're getting burden from both the sides, burden at the young age, burden at the elderly age. So the mass of people which is going on increasing. And we have diabetes, I already told you. So we have this problem. And a significant number of these people come for treatment with serious problems like unstable angina, that means chest pain occurring at rest, with a heart attack, myocardial infarction. And the state-of-art treatment for them is as early as possible, you open the artery. Even if you open the artery in an acute heart attack by giving a intravenous drug like streptokinase or tenecteplase, most of them do not get complete patency. All of them should be going to a cath lab. That's the recommendation now. If you cannot go to a cath lab in the first few hours, get a thrombolytic therapy done, go to the nearest hospital within 12 hours and get an angiogram done, indicating that a very large number of our patients get into angiographies followed by either angioplasty or bypass surgery. You also know that the pace of bypass surgery is not keeping up with the pace of angioplasty. Angioplasty is taking over. Numbers, many more angioplasty is done as compared to bypass surgery. Bypass surgery figures are very static or coming down all over the world. In fact, in India, still bypass surgery is continuing at some pace, competing against angioplasty because, interestingly, bypass surgery is cheaper than angioplasty in India. Whereas anywhere else in the world, bypass surgery is much more costly because it means 4 days, 7 days, 8 days hospital stay. And hospital stay in our country is not as expensive. Whereas, putting in a stent is more expensive. One stent costs an average, even if it is a low cost, 65 to 70,000 rupees. So if you have to put in 2-3 stents, it becomes more than 2 lakhs. And bypass surgery can be done, even if you have to put in 4 grafts, 5 grafts, the cost is the same. 1,75,000. So that is the economics which prevails here. And as you can see from this, that coronary interventions, that means angioplasties, are increasing every year by about 25 to 30%. It will go on increasing, and this increase is much more than in the West. Because in the West, they have the centers and most of the people have facilities to go. Here, the facilities are increasing now. You would see that 20 years ago, there were 2 cath labs or 3 cath labs in the city of Delhi. Today, I think we have 50 or 55 cath labs in the city of Delhi. So with the result that we can't keep account. Tomorrow, every month there's a new cath lab somewhere. So that's good. So that people have an access to a place. And as I told you, the most gratifying angioplasty is in a setting of acute heart attack, where you can save lives, where you can reduce the chance of patient becoming a cripple because of heart failure, because if you treat in time, his heart function will remain nearly normal or at least 40-45% ejection fraction, whereas if you don't treat in time, his ejection fraction becomes 20%, he can't walk a step and he becomes a burden on the community. So you see that numbers are increasing, and as you can see that single vessel disease, multi-vessel disease, all is increasing. As you can see that 1/3 of the procedures even in this registry were for multi-vessel disease, because traditionally angioplasty, when it started 30 years ago, 35 years ago, it used to be meant for one vessel or one focal region so that you can fix it. But today, very complex patients can be handled by angioplasty because of better techniques, operator experience has increased, and the stents which have come are much more predictable. You must have heard of drug-eluting stents, where the recurrence chances becomes much lower. So that's why it is becoming more and more accepted, because it is a non-surgical method. The patient goes home the next day. We should also know that angiogram is not the gold standard for diagnosing physiology of coronary artery disease. What you see here, like you see here, a very significant blockage of the artery. Well, this is significant by any method. This is a very tight stenosis, would need a treatment. But in addition, you would see there are many other blocks. Like here, there is a narrowing which somebody would label as 30%. Here is a narrowing which somebody would label as 50-60%. And now it's called oculostenotic reflex. If he goes to a hospital which is trying to make even, and the doctor who has joined that hospital, interventional cardiologist, when he joined a corporate hospital or any other hospital, he is asked, how many cases will you do in a month, average? He says, I think I'm so good and so popular, I'll do at least 50 angioplasties. Well, first month passes, he's able to do 10, it's a new hospital. Next month passes, he can do 7. Third month, aggressive marketing starts, he's able to do 20, but nowhere close to 50. So then the administration starts showing him indirectly, people are very diplomatic. They would remove his chair from that big room and tell him that, somebody else will also sit here. So what he starts doing is that it's not his fault. When a lesion he sees, even 50% lesion to him appears, oh, this is significant. Let us put in a stent. Well, these are anecdotes, but I can tell you they are little more than anecdotes. It is happening all over the world actually, because of the pressure of keeping numbers, and you lose to, try to lose contact with the patient. You look at the artery, you look at your target, like any corporate house. So, as I was telling you, that coronary angiogram just detects some arteries. It doesn't show you the flow. It doesn't tell you which portion of the heart is receiving less blood supply and which is receiving normal blood supply, which is extremely important. If in presence of a blockage, the blood supply to that vessel, from that vessel is normal, even with stress, that means that blockage is not producing any deleterious effect. So that blockage does not need anything, neither a bypass graft nor a stent. So that angiogram tells you the anatomy, just narrowing. There are other methods like a stress thallium. You must have heard of a stress thallium, a stress echo, which to some extent are very good. But which particular artery is really responsible for ischemia and which branch is not, that is difficult to find out. And there comes the method which I am going to talk about. I'll try to be as simple as possible, called fractional flow reserve. This is a method by which you can actually, in the cath lab, after doing an angiogram, before deciding which artery is producing the problem and needs to be reconstructed, and which artery does not. It's very simple. It is by definition, fractional flow reserve by definition is maximum flow down a vessel in presence of a narrowing. Obviously, if there is a 70% narrowing or 80% narrowing, at rest, even in any person, the blood flow is sufficient. This person doesn't get any angina. It is only when he runs, when he climbs upstairs, that 60 or 70% cannot increase the blood flow to the extent it should, and there is ischemia. So that is what this method is going to do, is that it will tell you the fractional flow reserve at when the vessels are fully dilated, and that can be done by injecting certain important potent vasodilators like adenosine. Adenosine, as you know, is a drug. If you inject, all the vessels dilate. And this is the wire. And actually, the measuring this, evaluating this is stupidly simple. It's extremely simple. Basically, this is the wire which is passed in across the lesion, and this wire near the tip, as you can see these, three wires, red, green and yellow, over a sensor element. So it just detects the pressure from here and gives it on the scope, and this is what is done. Now this is a coronary angiogram. Now the wire is first you passed in. The pressure is recorded from the healthy portion of the artery. So healthy portion of the artery, you measure the pressure through this catheter here and through the wire here. They are equal, absolutely equal. So the normal FFR will be 1 because the pressures are equal. Then you can see this narrowing. This is the narrowing. And now you push this wire distal to the narrowing, and this is the pressure transducer which I showed you in in the other slide, this slide. This is the sensor. So now you record the pressure, and you will see the pressure here is significantly lower. This is blue. Before it was pushed through, it was same. It was 1. Pressure from the guiding catheter, pressure from the wire is same. But when the severe lesion has been crossed, the pressure has fallen. And here you don't need to increase the flow because there is already such a difference in the pressure. That would mean that this obstruction is clearly flow limiting. Any flow limiting obstruction is going to be deleterious. That means that portion of the heart is receiving much less blood supply than it should be. So now this is saying that FFR 0.71, and when you push in the wire, inject adenosine, this kind of a tracing comes on the scope, and you see it gives a value of 0.71. That means that fractional flow reserve is 71% of normal. That means during conditions of maximum hyperemia, when you have injected the drug with maximum flow, the heart is receiving only 71% of the blood supply in comparison to 100. And it has been worked out that if it is less than 0.75, it is significant. That means it is significant to produce a problem to that heart. And if it is more than 0.80, it is absolutely not significant. Between 0.75 and 0.80, there is a gray zone. So that is the reason we take this 0.75 as 0.8, so that that gray zone is avoided. And if you do the FFR of a vessel, as I told you, it's very simple. You push in the wire and get this ratio. If it is less than 0.80, it means it is significant. And if it is more than 0.80, it is not significant. Basically, that means the lesion is mild. And mild lesion does not require an angioplasty. Tomorrow you might say, well, this mild lesion may progress in years to come. This 60% may become 90%. So why don't you fix it now? This has been studied very well, that mild lesions require very aggressive medical treatment. They require statins, they require ACE inhibitors, they require aspirin, which all patients should be having in good dosage. And it has been seen that up to 2 to 3 years now, these patients have been restudied, and that 0.80 and above remains 0.80 and above. 0.2% of the patients get into problems. 99.8% of patients do not get into a problem. So that means at that point of time you do not need to treat that particular lesion. And this is a very important study, in fact a sort of a legendary study in this science, called the FAME study, in which what was done is that patients were taken up on the basis of angiography, and it was decided that half the patients would be subjected to angioplasty based upon the angiographic narrowing, anything more than 50 to 60% stent. Other half FFR was measured, and only those lesions which were found to be functionally significant, that means FFR more than 0.80, were handled. And see the difference. The difference was that there was, number one, the number of stents which were used was significantly lower. Angio guided required 2.7 stents per patient, whereas FFR guided required 1.9 stent, which is significant. Significant reduction in the cost. This has been calculated in US dollars. For every patient, there was a cost saving of $675. Significant reduction in total cost of the procedure. It's not only the stent, because it is the time spent, it is the dye which is spent, it's the additional hardware. So every patient, there is this cost saving of $2,000. And not only that, at the end of the year, there were fewer deaths, fewer complications in the group of patients who were treated on the basis of functional analysis rather than only anatomical measure. So it was not only more efficacious, but it was also much more cost effective. And there was no significant difference in the procedure time. One might say that it might take hours extra. No, there was no significant difference in the procedure time. And if you see the economics, you would see in 1,000 scenarios, you would see that FFR guided was not only better for the patient's efficacy, but it was also significantly cost effective. Less number of stents used, and in the West, most of it is covered by the insurance. So there was a big gain for the insurance in terms of money to be reimbursed. Also, there was a big gain in the term of patients doing better. Patients not requiring readmissions for restenosis, because every stent, in spite of having best technology, there's a 3 to 4% chance still of restenosis. So if you put in a stent where it was not required, that particular stent by restenosis would make that milder disease even more significant. So less readmissions, less heart attacks in the 1 year or 2 years, and improved survival. At the same time, lower cost. Now we also did this in our scenario. I thought, if it applies in US, does it apply in India? What we did is that we took 117 consecutive coronary lesions in a multivessel disease scenario and did fractional flow reserve. And it was found that of these lesions, which are between 50% and 90%, more than 90% lesion, one doesn't have to waste time. We know they are very significant. And this is today the guidelines of several countries, including the European Union, that you cannot intervene in a lesion. You will not be reimbursed by the insurance company if the lesion is between 50 to 90 and you have not shown that the FFR is less than 0.8. You will not be reimbursed. So we also did the same, and we find that 70% of these lesions between 50 and 90 had an FFR more than 0.80. That means they did not require an intervention, and it was only 30% of the lesions, 35 lesions, where that FFR was less than 0.80. Now you look at the cost-effective analysis. First, we had done that any lesion between 50 and 90, in our projection, that if we had stented all the lesions between 50% and 90%, out of these 111 lesions, what would have come is that only 30 were found to be ischemic. We also take into consideration that FFR wire also costs. Corporate hospital will make money out of FFR also. So give the cost of 30,000. Wire doesn't cost 30,000, but everything, okay, 30,000 rupees for FFR. Taking that into consideration, there was a saving of 50.7 lakh of rupees if you had stented all the lesions between 50 and 90. Now somebody would say, well, 50 to 70 I won't have stented. I would have stented only 70 to 90. If you take that, that would mean that you would have still stented, only 17 lesions were found to be ischemic out of 39. It means that 22 lesions were not considered for angioplasty, And the average cost here would be now, average saving would be 12 lakh. Still 12 lakh of rupees, even if you had not stented 50 to 70, but stented 70 to 90. 70 to 90, most people, when you go to the patient also telling them, patient these days asks you, they didn't ask you how is the patient, कितने % blockage? 70 है, 80 है, हाँ जी फिर बता दो. So out of those 70 to 90 also, there is a significant number who do not require it. So I'll show you some case illustration just to explain my point. Now this is a lady who actually is a secretary in one of the central government. She had a heart attack 2 years ago. Her right coronary artery was normal and her left anterior descending upper one was totally blocked, and this did not require because that portion of the heart was totally not viable. Now you see there is a branch here in the lower panel. You don't have a pointer, but you can see it, which appears to be narrow. Do you have a pointer? Mouse से वो हिल जाता है, goes haywire. Okay, yeah. So there appears to be, I'll show you because it's so important to show you. See here there is an arrow. And by eyeballing, since I do angioplasty even at night during my sleep, this looks like that this is, it's not a mild lesion. We do an FFR. FFR is 0.97, indicating that absolutely not at all flow limiting. So nothing done. Other patient. Here there is a suspicion of a left main disease, and left main disease is considered to be a widowmaker's disease, very serious. It must go for the procedure. Although these days some of these are going for angioplasty, but most of them go for surgery. Now here there is a left main, but there was a doubt because the patient's symptoms and other things were not correlating. So we did an FFR, and the FFR is 0.91. So one major surgery avoided because the flow is absolutely normal. And if the flow is absolutely normal, if you put in grafts to these arteries, those grafts are going to get blocked because there is competitive flow. There is a normal flow, you put in one more, conduit to increase the flow, one of them is going to close down. Either the native disease becomes more and closes off, or the graft gets blocked. So right also has a similar thing. FFR is normal. Now this is interesting. Now this particular patient has a disease of two arteries. One of them is diagonal, which is the last example I'm showing. An artery here is showing narrowing. In fact, this narrowing to the naked eye appears possibly significant. And his other artery, and he had come with unstable angina. His other artery, the right coronary artery, shows something in the beginning, just at the tip of the cattle near the bend, which appears not so significant as that. Now see the FFR. FFR, the diagonal artery, which appeared more significant, is 0.90, which is normal. And the FFR of the proximal right coronary artery, which appeared borderline, is 0.79, is significant. So he underwent an angioplasty of the right, and FFR not only tells you that it's required, after angioplasty and stenting, you measure it again, it normalizes. If it has not normalized, that means you have not done your complete job. And here, after putting in a stent, FFR has become 0.94, which is excellent. So friends, I would tell you that the value of FFR is immense, especially in all the centers which are doing invasive procedures. We know the limitations of angiography. I showed you 3 examples. I've got lots and lots of examples. There is a discrepancy between what you see in the angiogram, morphology, and the physiology. And that is, and non-invasive investigations like stress therapy have some limitations because they will tell you the area of ischemia. They will tell you per vessel. Suppose there is inferior ischemia. Inferior ischemia, right artery also supplies, circumflex also supplies, circumflex has 2 branches. So which one to do? So this is the method which will tell you. And the potential downside to indiscriminate drug-eluting stent use, because there is a feeling that there is an indiscriminate use of stents because of many factors, industry-driven, or whatever-driven, target-driven, oculostenotic reflex. These are human nature. But there has to be some method which can scientifically tell you, well, this is required, this is not required. So measuring FFR can be a useful technique in this setting. Thank you very much. And these are the guidelines of the European Society that FFR has to be done if the lesion is between 50 and 90. Otherwise you don't pay yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Kaur. Brilliant as ever, always. So if the human cloning was made ethical, I would immediately file a global patent for Upendra Kaul, and then I will churn out a copy when somebody gives me $1 billion at least to start the bidding process. Dr. Kaul made a couple of comments on the corporate hospital, and he was looking at me every time. He has to answer my question, how many times I asked him to have a target, and then has he delivered or not. In my current hospital, I have got 4 cardiologists, and we are going to be 3 years now, in another month's time, and my team of 4 cardiologists has touched the target of 20 last month, and we celebrated it because they could now survive. He will also hear that I have requested one to leave. It's not on the clinical competence, it's only on the soft skill part that I have to ask the gentleman to go out. But yes, the multi-factor behind this overuse of stents, I think this particular study very clearly elaborates what we know today is not even 10% of the human physiology, what to talk of human pathology. I am also his patient, and it's a classic case where I would have been pushed for an angioplasty, and he insisted, I am only doing your angiogram to prove the point, you don't need anything. And that was 6 years ago? 6 years ago. And in my annual check now, I only get stress echo done, that too not every year, every alternate year. So that is the tremendous difference if you are fully equipped. I think this study also helps the health insurance sector. This study also probably leads us to reduction of the total healthcare delivery cost when it comes to a cardiac lesion. So thank you, Dr. Kaul, for sharing with us. I hope this study is actually noted and taken care of, and maybe as a supplement to your exercise for the standard treatment guidelines, you could probably write to the ministry that this should become a prerequisite for any center to actually start interventional cardiology program. Since he is a busy clinician and his patients are already waiting in his outdoor, which is scheduled from 4 to 6. 2 to 4. And he has been getting calls. So just 2 questions.
I have got 3 questions for you, Dr. Kaul. Yes. One is, what is the role of collateral circulation in the cardiac muscle? At what site do you think that the collateral circulation will take over and I don't have to do anything with the stenosis? Number 1. Number 2 is, what is the role of statins? There are studies to say that some minor constriction will improve with statins. And third is, what is the Indian Society of Cardiologists doing to avoid unnecessary stenting and unnecessary cardiac procedures in corporate hospitals, which are being done for monetary consideration only?
Question number 3, collaterals. Collaterals typically form in arteries which are nearly totally occluded. And this is a good method of supplying the blood supply. And typically collaterals cannot give the blood supply which is equivalent to a normal vessel. So in presence of collaterals also you can have ischemia. And I did not highlight, I have a number of slides, that FFR method, if the collaterals are very well established, FFR will come normal. If collaterals are inadequate, it will come as abnormal. So that also, because this method does not only study the narrowing, it studies the blood supply to the myocardium, so collaterals also come. So if in presence of collaterals, you are still getting angina, or helium is showing positivity in that region, or an FFR is still less than 0.80, then it is ischemic. Number 2, statins. Statins are wonderful drugs and should be taken in proper doses in most people who are high risk to get coronary event, and all the people who have coronary artery disease, angioplasty done or surgery done or not required but 30% lesion, 40% must be on it, and in appropriate doses. And the appropriate doses, there are 2 studies which have shown regression of narrowing. It's not huge. It's not something like a 50% will become 0%. Number 1 is progression is prevented. That's very important. That 50 or 40 remains 40. And it's also shown that 40 becomes about 30. So there is a modest regression, but that happens at higher doses. For rosuvastatin, it is 40 milligrams. For atorvastatin, it is 80 milligrams. And we have done studies to show that 80 milligrams of atorvastatin is very well tolerated by our Indian patients. There should not be any, hanky-panky about it that Europeans tolerate it. Yeah, 2%, 3% get some problems, most do not. The third is, what is Cardiological Society of India? For that matter, societies can give guidelines. Guidelines you cannot force upon by law. Every patient has to be treated as a patient with guidelines. It is for the health providers, the government and others to audit. And auditing cannot be done by the same hospital. It's not possible that Apollo Hospital does its own auditing and say, we're fine, we're very good. It has to be done by external people, and those auditors have to be appointed by the people who are concerned about the health of the country, nation. And they just go, they don't go, they just pick up something at random. If there are 1,000 angioplasties done or 500, okay, give us 30. And take it to experts and then see about it. That is the way. And if you pick up some cases where you think are very clearly violations, it has to be brought to the notice of the medical council. Action has to be taken. So that is the way I think that if I made one of the health promoters, I would start like this.
One more question, Dr. Sanjeev is very keen to ask you.
Sir, I am Dr. Sanjeev. So firstly, I first heartily compliment you for being so forthright and candid in your presentation, and that too coming from a senior cardiologist of your stature. Now, it's not only, it doesn't end with the angiography, it extends to almost a lot of procedures like hysterectomies and cesareans and so many other procedures where earlier they were overused, then it was misused, and now it's abused. So there's a need for a medical audit in so many other procedures. Most of the countries have a regulatory mechanism in place where they have a system of need certificate. Like in Delhi, you said there are 50 cath labs which may not be required, there may not be that much demand. There are 100 CT scans, and in periphery there may be none. So don't you think that this makes a strong case for a need certificate by the regulatory agencies, government, that before any healthcare facility is opened, its genuine need should be assessed and then only it should be allowed. And so many advanced countries are doing it, we just left it to feed market economies. Whosoever wants, nobody wants to go into psychiatry, everybody is going into glamour disciplines like cardiology and so on. So if you could please offer your
opinion. Absolutely right, that the needs of the public and what is being provided, what is available, has to be have a proper distribution. Now if you go from Safdarjung Hospital towards Ashram, you would see how many hospitals. Safdarjung Hospital, All India Institute, Mulchand Hospital, opposite there are 3 hospitals, 4 hospitals there, and then you go to other part of the city, 20 kilometers away. They have to come all the way from there. Should there be a regulation that if you are opening a new hospital, why should it be there? So similarly for other equipments also. So the distribution of the healthcare has to be even. It's not only for tablets, it's not only for investigations, it's also for the therapeutic centers of excellence. If they are equally distributed, evenly distributed, at least an attempt should be made for that.
Practically, is it feasible for a government to have an agency the need certificate is issued prior to any
Absolutely.
Dr. Sanjeev, we don't have a health regulatory authority of India. It's still not there. I'm told this year probably we might hear something about it. When it comes, will it have teeth? That's the question. We are very smart, fantastic at making policies, but we do not implement them.
So I have a question relevant to this thing. I'll be brief. I'm a patient. We have the internet. As far as the government and regulatory is concerned, with Raja being in jail and Madi being out, just forget it. Don't waste your time. We have our democracy. We have a joker called Anna. I'm purposely using the word joker. But he is the guy who woke all of us up. Now we have the internet. It is free. It's accessible. Can we post up this information on the internet, like YouTube videos, etc., and put out pasting before all the hospitals? Look, if you're having heart trouble, have a look at this before you go there. And can this kind of information be disseminated not in this August hall, but to people who need this information? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input.
I'm available. I consult in IT. I do consult in healthcare informatics, and I personally think healthcare informatics is a fraud for the simple reason you can have informatics, computer can do things better. But if your intention is to fraud, it can do it faster and much more efficiently.
Yeah, so that is the flip side of the internet.
So, but my point is, let's just have this information on the internet and put it available so it's available.
I'll just make one point which Dr. Upendra Kaul had mentioned when he started the presentation, the statistics on angioplasties and the CABG and why surgery is still scoring over the angioplasties in India. The WHO guidelines for South Asia very clearly say economic criteria should be one of the key criteria for making the family understand to take the final decision. And it has been proved, which he also corroborated, the cost of doing CABG in South Asia is far more economical as compared to the angioplasty. Not only the one-time episode, but also the recurring cost of maintaining an angioplasty patient. So these are things which will evolve, which will change. The human nature of the society reflects the time in which we live. If the entire fabric is corrupt, the doctors, the healthcare professionals are also part of the society. So they will do the same way with the other professions are doing.
So
only thing is they get highlighted.
Doctors have to sign a Hippocratic oath, if I recollect.
Well, sir, the Hippocratic oath doesn't bear on the family of the doctor.
It does apply to the doctors.
The Hippocratic oath
and you
doesn't
have
bear
an
on the family of
obligation
the
as
doctor.
doctors to do that.
So doctors
It's
also
about
have
time
to
the
survive.
doctors understood
What
that
we
they
need is
not a part of the society.
what
they
we
are
need-
selected part of the society.
let me
They have an
complete.
obligation.
Nowhere there in the Medical Council of India.
What we need is patient advocacy groups.
How about setting that up?
First we have to have health regulatory authority. What will the advocacy group
So we'll,
call against?
it's like India starving millions. 60 years hence, 50% of our people are starving. Will we have to have Anna to come down to tell us this?
Well, the 50% people are starving, but 50% people are having mobile phones.
Yes.
So the dichotomy in our culture, in our country, is very different from what we hear from different worlds. So we will have to tailor a different solution. Okay, I think he has to leave, so let's close. Thank you, Dr. Paul. My next speaker is Dr. Siddharth Agrawal. So from an elite cardiologist from a corporate hospital, I am now an executive director of an NGO. And he will talk about the theme proper, enhancing equity by bringing healthcare to the masses. He does some work in urban slums and rural settings. He has been running these projects, I think at 20 locations, right? And he is going to share with us some data and some insights how his model of care can actually extend and bring equity in healthcare delivery. Dr. Siddharth.
Thank you, Dr. Neet. It's an honor and a privilege to be speaking before you all at this forum. I'll try and share some thoughts about how we can move towards equitable access of healthcare and what can be some approaches towards making insurance or insurance-like models accessible to the poor. So, let's just start with the burden of healthcare on the poor. Health is a dimension of poverty, and it's important to just look at it that if somebody is ill and has modest means, it will accentuate poverty. And what we have seen from studies is that a person from the poorest quintile of the population, which is the lowest 1/5 of India's population, despite more health problems, is 6 times less likely to access hospitalization than a person from the richest quintile. This is what the data has shown us, and most of this is government data from different ministries. Since I deal more with the urban segment of India's population, I'll make reference to that, but broadly, most of the challenges face rural populations similarly. But why urban becomes important is that we were talking, for example, a while ago about the number of hospitals between Safdarjung and Ashram, which is a city. And likewise, if you look at hospitals in Delhi, in South Delhi, or whichever district of Delhi, we often see that in urban centers, despite this presence of so many super speciality, modest speciality, primary care hospitals and clinics, still there are very large number of people in these cities who are not able to access these hospitals. And I don't know how many of you have experienced trying to access a hospital like All India Institute. I think anyone here who's sitting would not fall in the category of below poverty line, as the Planning Commission says. But despite that, many of us must have encountered challenges in obtaining an appointment at All India Institute, or must have had to got someone to call up somebody at All India Institute to facilitate an appointment. So these are the issues which, if we look at the lowest 40% of our population, they usually do not even have that person who can call for them. So you see people lying outside All India Institute or a Safdarjung Enclave or Safdarjung Hospital or other hospitals, and they do not get these access. The numbers in urban India are big. Planning Commission says that in urban India, 25.7% live below the poverty line, which makes about 100 million people. Now 100 million people in urban India are officially living below the poverty line. And how many percentage does anybody think would actually have below poverty line cards in urban areas? 10%. This is statistics not by any study with an NGO like mine has done. This is statistics from the Ministry of Statistics, Government of India, जिसका आजकल ऐड देखते हैं आप टेलीविजन पे, NSSO ऐड देखते हैं ना कि हमें जानकारी देनी चाहिए NSSO को, क्योंकि उसके आधार पे भारत सरकार सबके लिए योजनाएं बनाती है. तो उसी ऐड की जो एजेंसी है, उसी का स्टडी ये बताती है कि शहरी क्षेत्रों में भारत में 10% लोगों के पास बिलो पॉवर्टी लाइन कार्ड है. तो भारत सरकार की एजेंसी ने बताया. भारत सरकार की एजेंसी ने ही बताया कि बिलो पॉवर्टी लाइन 25.7% लोग हैं अर्बन इंडिया में. तो ये हम दिस इज द इशू व्हिच वी फेस. I'm just using below poverty line card data as an illustrative example to help all of us understand कि अगर हेल्थ केयर एक्सेस होगी तो उसमें भी ऐसे ही चैलेंज होगा कि सपोजिंग राष्ट्रीय स्वास्थ्य बीमा योजना पहुंचनी है इतने लोगों पर पहुंचेगी कितने पर? जस्ट लाइक बीपीएल कार्ड पहुंचना कितने पर चाहिए था? ऑब्वियसली ऑल बिलो पॉवर्टी लाइन, बट इतने सारे सालों के बाद इट हैज स्टिल रीच्ड ओनली 10%. तो राष्ट्रीय स्वास्थ्य बीमा योजना या और जो बहुत सारी हेल्थ केयर योजनाएं जैसे जननी सुरक्षा योजना, वो पहुंचेगी कितनों के पास is what is the issue that I'm trying to highlight before you, and I'll try and come up with some solutions. And why Janani Suraksha Yojana is important? Just among the urban poor, there are 2.7 million births per year. और इसके 3 या 4 गुना रूरल एरियाज में ऐड कर लीजिए. So 10 to 12 million births among the poor, and this is the poor which are officially designated as poor, living at that 32 to 40 rupees type of poverty line, which you must have read a lot in the newspapers about. So this is that segment, and if we take a little more, then obviously the number will increase. I mean, उसके ऊपर वाली layer को भी अगर include कर लें. This is some data which tells us that जो urban और rural में हम distinction देखते हैं, और अगर if we take urban poor, then it falls far below. This is access to antenatal care and hospital deliveries. Urban poor access is far lower. This is access to a very basic service which जिसको टीका लगवाना कहते हैं, vaccination. Very basic service, almost. I think anybody sitting in this room would now even imagine कि दिल्ली में जो lowest quartile है, only 40 children out of 100 children less than 1 year receive this. दिल्ली शहर में भी. I mean, this is all India data, but incidentally हमारे capital का भी data बिल्कुल यही है. But that's just a matter. That is the most recent data available because the NFHS 3 और National Family Health Survey third round के बाद अभी तक कोई और survey हुआ नहीं है. तो अगर हम मान लेते हैं कि थोड़ा बहुत incremental improvement हो गया होगा, तो it must be about 10 percentage points, not more than that. In 5 years, because 60 साल उससे पहले की भी history है ना हमारे पास. So the improvement isn't going very fast. Likewise, survival also among children less than 5 years is far less among this segment of the population, and undernutrition is very high. So these are all illustrative of the access of healthcare that is reaching to them, because that is the reason why you are getting children who are undernourished. क्योंकि हमारी healthcare access कम है. Now, what are the barriers? So this slide tells us that the barriers to access are lack of knowledge about where the services are, because many a times government or municipal corporations open dispensaries, but they operate so quietly so that that doctor doesn't have any pressure. I have seen dispensaries where doctor चुपचाप आके ताला खोल के attendance लगा के 2 घंटे बाद चले जाते हैं. And it is very common, it's not surprising at all. I have been myself in the health system in government of Uttar Pradesh, a physician at a primary health center, and I have seen the system through, and I understand why this type of a thing happens, because sometimes the doctor comes from a distance which is about 2 hours to his workplace, तो वो तो कहता है मेरा दिन तो तभी शुरू हो गया, उसकी ड्यूटी तभी शुरू हो गई जब वो चल दिए घर से, और 2 घंटे उसको वापस जाने में लगते हैं. तो अगर वो वहाँ पूरी सेवा देगा तो वो रात को पहुँचेगा. So that is how these things operate, and there is some need to make this system more responsive. Now, what all can be done is, an issue which would require a lot of discussion, but these are challenges, these are practical, real challenges seen and observed by me myself. I actually go to these places, as Dr. Praneeth was saying. मतलब मैं इस टाइप पे ही काम करता हूँ, तो ऐसे डॉक्टर से मिल लेता हूँ, दोस्ती भी कर लेता हूँ, प्यार से समझ लेता हूँ, तभी मुझको ये सच्चाई पता है, क्योंकि उन्होंने अपनी जुबानी बताई है. एक डॉक्टर्स की मीटिंग तो इसी हॉल में हुई थी, where I was discussing this, that were those were doctors from the Delhi government and municipal corporation in this very hall. और जब थोड़ी देर बाद tension realize करी, तो I kind of encouraged them to relax and help us all come up with challenges. So, because they realize that these are realities, sometimes we are able to open up and come with challenges. Another challenge is that slum context mein there is a large segment of unlisted slums or illegal or unauthorized or whichever way people have described that. Sometimes that also remains uncovered because of a strange notion in the mind of the authority that any slum which is not part of the official list is not entitled to healthcare, whereas that is not written in the Constitution of India. हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में तो अगर कोई बाहर का व्यक्ति भी भारत देश में किसी वजह से रह रहा है, उसको भी हेल्थ केयर मिलने पे कोई बाधा नहीं है, क्योंकि हेल्थ केयर देने के लिए यू डोंट इवन हैव टू सी द पासपोर्ट ऑफ दैट पर्सन। हमारे देश में ऐसा नहीं लिखा हुआ है कि आपको ये देखना पड़ेगा कि ये व्यक्ति कौन है और उसके पास सारे डॉक्यूमेंट्स हैं कि वो लीगल है या नहीं, तभी देंगे आप। कभी आप में से किसी ने अनुभव किया है कि आपका कोई पासपोर्ट, आइडेंटिटी, सब कुछ मांगने के बाद ही डॉक्टर इलाज करता है? सो दिस इज अ नोशन, बट notions continue and they affect human beings, and I'm trying to bring all this to everybody's attention because they are affecting a very large proportion of the population of our country. Public health services are also inadequate, and I mean, I don't want to dwell much upon that. There is a need to augment public health service, do it in partnership with private providers or whichever way, but जो एक्सेस है वो, जैसे थोड़ी देर पहले भी बात हो रही थी कि जो आपने सवाल पूछा था डॉक्टर संजीव, कि एक्विटेबली डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड अगर होंगे then there is a likelihood that we will have more services which people can access. Now this is another interesting thing. Government has given a lot of subsidy on healthcare, and this data tells us that 77% of government subsidy on curative care goes to the 3 richest quintiles. Quintiles मतलब पूरे को 5 में बांट दिया, तो ऊपर के 3 जो richest हैं, they are able to access 77% of all the subsidy. And I see some smiles, which means that people understand why this happens. Where is the negotiating power to get the subsidy? Discounts या सब्सिडीज लेने की नेगोशिएटिंग पावर जिसको होती है उसको मिल जाएगी ना सब्सिडी, नीड के हिसाब से नहीं मिलती है। So often if in a hospital there is an option of getting a subsidy, whether it is for drugs or for an investigation or whatever service one is going, if you have the wherewithal within you to get that, whether you need it or you don't need it in terms of your needs, you will try and get it, and that is how this is what the data shows. So there again there is this mismatch, and it needs a multifaceted approach, a lot of thinking on the parts of those who are richer. Maybe they should themselves voluntarily not take such subsidies even if they are offered. Then how does, I'm talking about this because this links to insurance also, because we have to understand what should insurance cover. The cost of treatment is cost of transport, consultation fee, hospital admission, medicines, loss of wages. We tend to often ignore that. क्योंकि जो मिडिल क्लास सैलरीड पर्सन है उसको छुट्टी मिल जाती है, लेकिन जो वेज पे काम कर रहा है उसे छुट्टी नहीं मिलती है ना, उसकी हम उस दिन की तनख्वाह काट लेते हैं मोस्टली। जो मजदूरी कर रहा है, चावड़ी बाजार में ठेला चला रहा है, और एनीथिंग एल्स दैट पर्सन इज डूइंग, दैट पर्सन डजंट अर्न फॉर दोस फ्यू डेज. सो दैट इज आल्सो अ कॉस्ट, दैट इज अ बर्डन ऑन दैट पर्सन. And poor people are spending disproportionately higher percentage of their income on health than the rich. Now this is very interesting. When we see the monthly per capita expenditure on the basis of which our planning commission has come up with the poverty line, if you look at that report which is available on the planning commission website, the last page of that report has a list of all the expenditure that person makes as a percentage, and we will see that the richer people make less proportion of expenditure on health, the poorer make a greater proportion of expenditure on health. So I don't know who is subsidizing whom. I mean, that's something which we have to think about. Now here are some things which we feel could be explored. Now these 3 slides I just run through because Nishant is the expert. He will deal with this far better than I will. I just placed this for record just in case Nishant got busy elsewhere. So it's just दिखाने के लिए हैं. I'm not going to dwell upon these. These are various insurance programs which have been running in our country, which have eventually culminated in RSBY, which Nishant will talk about. But what are the challenges of all these schemes? Often they are excluding the cost of drugs. Often they are excluding the cost of diagnostic tests, or if not excluding, trying to get that test done either by a cashless mechanism or getting reimbursed is very complicated if you are not hospitalized. So those are issues. Consultation, OPD is often missed in most insurance schemes, and chronic illnesses are often excluded from most insurance schemes. And therefore we realize that there is a need to rethink whether insurance alone or something which is like a one size fits all approach is really going to work for this large diverse nation, or we need to have more creative ways to think about this. Which is what we were talking about a while ago in Dr. Kaul's presentation. In Dr. Kaul's presentation, which talked about needs, need-based treatment की बात वो भी कर रहे थे. यहाँ भी अलग-अलग category of people have different needs, and how is it that we can handle that? So one approach is community health funds, which we have a lot of experience with, where communities have saved in a collective pool, and they have been using that collective pool for health emergencies. These are women who are writing this in a register. This is a money box in which they keep the money. These are their records. जो lower right hand पे एक passbook भी है, वो they maintain it themselves. And there are about 120 groups representing 3 lakh slum dwellers in Agra and Indore, and they have a total revenue of approximately 20 lakhs, which is revolving among the population as loans. And in the last 2 years, about 2,000 loans have been disbursed for health care, about 2,000 for education and other social needs, and 1,000 for livelihood. और इसमें किसी ने कुछ सब्सिडी कुछ नहीं दिया है, सब कुछ उनका है. हम लोग सिर्फ उनको हैंड होल्ड, मेंटर और ट्रेन करते हैं. And there are similar examples in Pune, Mumbai and Bihar. The other thing which we have tried is a private, socially committed, मतलब not totally free, 800, 900, 1000 रुपए ले ले, but this doctor is socially committed. He provides maternal child health camps once a month to the people, and this is another approach which people are paying 10 to 15 rupees for availing the service. And at least that is reaching them, and the women's groups which we just saw pictures of those women, they are facilitating access to these schemes. So the public sector has to strengthen and increase its outreach. It has to reach out to the people, not expect कि यहाँ facility बन गई तो ये सब लोग पहुँच जाएंगे अपने आप और सब कुछ equitable हो जाएगा अपने आप, access to the masses हो जाएगा अपने आप. It does not happen like that. You have to ensure that. In the private sector, if there is more social responsibility, again with outreach, and I know very soon Dr. V.L. Kapoor Hospital is going to start some outreach activities in some 4 or 5 designated areas of Delhi. So that is one example where hospitals in the private sector can reach out to the areas where the need is and increase access of people to the healthcare. And these health funds which we talked about is another suggestion. In insurance, what we have realized is that the product has to be based on discussion with the people for whom it is being created. The challenge in a country like India is that everything is managed centrally, and the model is developed with very good intention and a lot of creativity, but the people for whom it is being done, it is not modeled with them or by them. If the insurance model would be developed by the poor people, then it would be perhaps more addressing their needs. So the first option is that discounted outpatient consultation, discount on drugs, free checkup and annual hospitalized expenses. Cost, which people suggested, these three models which I will share you, these are suggestions from people belonging to slums. This is not my creativity. They wanted to cost approximately 50 paisa to 1 rupee per person per day. Outpatient benefits similar to the above. Cashless hospitalization for empaneled hospitals wanted to cost about 1 rupee per day. Third option, 1.25 rupee per person per day. So what this tells us that this is the approximate amount. These are the services that they are facing difficulty in accessing, and this is what they need. And if we are able to develop a approach to address their needs, it would perhaps be better. Let us all try and work together to bring about improved access to all the disadvantaged segments of our country's population. Thank you.
Thank you, Siddharth. This is coming out straight from the man who is on the street. I think we will keep the discussion and question answers at the end. Since I have the dual task of chairing the session and also speak on something on how insurance coverage can boost with regard to healthcare access, equity. I think I'll not take much of time because I also have to balance the total time that we have taken for this session also. We heard Dr. Siddharth mentioning about the issues, the barriers to access and certain interventions that his NGO has tried in terms of creating self-help groups, risk pooling. It's nothing but risk pooling which the insurance sector is supposed to provide us. We also heard from Dr. Upendra Paul especially mentioned, and I think Dr. Praveen in the pre-lunch session mentioned, every catastrophic illness in India brings down 2.2% population below the poverty line. So any catastrophic illness in this country, or for that matter even globally, let's not be repressed that it happens only in India. I can assure you, despite all the ills of the Indian healthcare delivery system, we are one of the best and the finest. In USA, 40% people have no access at all. In this country, a pauper who cannot afford even a glass of water can walk into a super spacious room and at least get a consultation. So that is the plus side of it. Let's appreciate that as well. Insurance, which is, we were dismally at around 3% about 12-13 years ago. The penetration of insurance was hardly 3%. And this 3% comprised of primarily employed groups, just like in US. It's only with the social insurance schemes coming up that the penetration today is around 14%, as compared to China, which is around, I think, around 98%. Anyway, China is around 98%. And 40 years ago, both China and India were at the same level, 2.6, if I remember the correct figure. So how insurance can boost healthcare access? A couple of facets have already been covered by Siddharth, so there is no point my repeating them. The fundamental principle of insurance is risk pooling. But the flip side of an insurance company is, while it is supposed to be doing risk pooling, it also does adverse selection. So, if you have a predisposing disease, it would not like to cover you. If you are 55 plus, thanks to the regulatory body, now there are policies wherein even if you have not got a policy till the age of 55, you can get a policy. And if you have been holding a medical policy of your own and you have crossed 55, I think the latest regulation says the insurance company cannot refuse it, they have to continue the policy. The access to healthcare has been the biggest barrier in this country, not only for those who don't have the resources to pay for the healthcare services, also for those who have resources to pay for healthcare services. Take example, 30 years ago, everybody who needed a bypass used to fly down to Houston. And Texas Heart had a huge set, 17-member team dealing with patients coming from Asia. I have met with all 17 members of that team. And when I met them, half of them were having work, half of them were only loitering around. Because we had few centers opened up in India by that time. So, the availability of healthcare services are not linked to the need. We heard this need statement in the previous session from Dr. Sanjeev, and he asked again that from Dr. Kaul. This is something which was actually suggested by Professor McKebney when he was invited by Pandit Nehru to formulate the first 5-year plan, the health portion. This was talked then, and it has still not been touched. And till the time a health regulatory authority is created which has got teeth, it will not happen. So how can we make it happen? When we buy the insurance policies, despite the fact there is a regulatory body in insurance sector, the policy is still the seller's market. He puts the conditions. He puts the condition: if you want to utilize cashless facility, you can go to XYZ hospital. But if you ask the insurance provider, this list of 100 hospitals, do they provide you the same quality of service? You won't get an answer. So where is the equity? There is no equity in health delivery. There is no equity in the indemnity that you are buying. And the flip side of buying an indemnity policy is you don't fall ill, so your money is gone down the drain. But that is unfortunately the dictum which we Indians believe in. Since I am perfectly healthy today, why should I buy a health policy? I am doing disservice to my own self by not buying the policy. So we need to create an awareness. The social insurance scheme started by governments, various state governments, and then RSBY. There have been success stories so far. And I am not in any way making a statement that they are sustainable. Any scheme requires resource, which is money, and if it does not generate profit, it will collapse sooner than later. How much money the government can pool into these kind of social insurance schemes from the taxpayers' coffers? It will not last long. So these social insurance schemes need to be upgraded, the awareness needs to be created how to utilize them, how to demand the quality from that indemnity policy. So the healthcare delivery context in India is transitioning from individual-centric, the doctor-centric model to patient-centric model. It is only the transition has started, and the transition has started because of the entry of corporates. Corporates only get flack. Making profit in health and education is a crime in this country. Why? It should not be. Which hotel gives 25% food free? Tell me one hotel in this country. None. Which education institution, although they still have to do something, but majority of the education institutions don't give anything free. So why restrict only health sector? Channelize that resource. It can become a not-for-profit, a Section 25 company, and the profit which is generated out of the scheme can get plow back into extending the reach. I think this is what we need to talk. This is what we need to work on and make it happen. The social insurance schemes have been created. They have shown that they are successful in creating access, in creating some semblance of equity, in creating some semblance of quality assurance. But they have just started. They need to be strengthened. They need to be, the public needs to be made aware, and it should become a right that I should be insured. It should be a fundamental right, not a voluntary choice. Unless that happens, and each one of us pools for our own health risk. There are various models of creating health funds. There is a Singapore model, there is a Hong Kong model, there is a Swedish model. There are various kinds of models. There is a South Korean model which is very different from all these models and has worked very well. There is a Philippine model, where even the OPD drugs are dispensed. But the caveat in the drug delivery is generics. Do we accept generics in this country? We are enamored with brand names. Dr. Paul was making certain points, and I heard from my friend sitting in the rear about the excesses by the hospitals. I have been in this sector for more than 35 years. I have worked in government sector, I have worked in NGO sector, I have worked as a freelance practitioner, freelance consultant, and I have worked in corporates. Let me assure you, it is the corporates which still deliver something more meaningful than any other system. Why? Because they have to create a good image. And today, that has become an essential ingredient for an organization to sustain and survive. So let's use kind of interventions which have been done by, let's say, Tatas, Birlas. They were non-institutionalized, promoter-specific interventions for societal good. They were also like something similar to social schemes the governments and various state governments have created. We could take a leaf out of those kind of models, pick up the social insurance, pick up the private health insurance, which is at least, this is one sector which is regulated to a large extent. What is needed is, this melting pot has to amalgamate all these various products and create a newer product which is again designed around the customer, which says there has to be a risk profiling. Please have a questionnaire, have a risk profiling score sheet, give it to the customer, do his evaluation, give it back the feedback, and then the actual process should be transparent enough to say, you look, you are 33-year-old, a 33-year-old man, the health policy indemnity would have cost you, let's say, 5,000 rupees for a year. Your risk profile, because of the genetic predisposition and because of the lifestyle habits, takes your score from, say, let's say, X to another 15% of risk. So your premium will go up by 25% or 15 basis points or 30 basis points. Initially it will be all empirical. We don't have the data for any insurance company today to actually come out. The only data the insurance companies talk about is high claim ratios, which is a fact. All these social insurance schemes, especially Yashasni in Karnataka, when they started, there was actually a concern, are they being overutilized? Number of surgeries went up. Were they really genuine surgeries? Or they were driven by the hospital and the doctor? So these are question marks. These things can only be managed if there are patient advocacy groups. Now, insurance companies are not going to make a patient advocacy group because the patient advocacy group will demand from the insurance company its rights first. So, the civil society will have to get up and make small groups. Maybe it's initially called a self-help group, so that there is no negative connotation from the health insurance or the health provider to think that this is a body which is coming to fight with us. Accreditation of hospitals has started in this country. It's a 6-year journey that we have done so far. 100 plus hospitals have been accredited, about 550 odd are in queue. There was a question raised in the pre-lunch session about the quality of water in an accredited hospital, and I surprised. These are issues that we have debated in the revision of the standards, and we found if we step beyond a particular level, it becomes as if NABH is trying to become a super regulator. We cannot be a regulator over a regulating body. That's the unfortunate part. The problem is, we have not been, this journey has just started. We are not in a stage where we can say the culture of quality has arrived. It might have arrived in, say, 30% of the hospitals which have been accredited. But we can't say with confidence that all 100 hospitals which have been accredited or all 550 which are asking for accreditation to be granted are into this journey. All these things will actually help access, because the customer knows when he buys a policy, what does he expect back in return when he needs the services. And that has to be transparent. To my mind, the larger the coverage, larger the risk pool, the better will be the services delivered. So we have to catalyze. If we want to have the dream of universal health access, I think we have to first realize the dream of universal health insurance. I think I will stop here because Nishant is an expert on the health economics and on insurance schemes, and he has been closely working on RSPY and a similar scheme which NCT of Delhi has been trying to formulate. So I will leave it to him to take on from here, and we will have question answer after he finishes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Praneeth, for giving some very interesting food for thought, and also to Siddharth for raising some very important issues. So, because this is something which is the need of the day, because as somebody who is working in this sector from past maybe 10-15 years, especially on these topics, the main question which arises today is that how we can ensure that not only the poor, which are government-defined poor, so to say, because as very rightly mentioned by Siddharth, that not all the people who are poor are government-defined poor, and not all the people who are government-defined are actually poor. So this is, both the cases are there, that people have card but they are not poor, and people don't have card but they are poor. So there are these targeting issues which are there, of course. In addition to that, also the issue of access to healthcare is another issue, that whether there is enough healthcare provider to provide the healthcare facility to the people or not. So what I will do today, and I think after listening to these points, some of the things I think we have tried to do something in RSPY, but it's a beginning. It's a beginning which has just happened 3.5 years before, and we have to see how it can move ahead. So I will go on to only few slides, and what I will talk today is, one, how the scheme was designed, because something which we talked a lot about, why a particular model has to be for a particular segment of population. And generally in the government, when any scheme is designed, it's not because of always people need it, number one. Number two, not because keeping in mind that for whom we are designing the scheme, it may be idea of some bureaucrat that let's have a scheme or some minister, and then you have these schemes designed. Fortunately for RSPY, when we were designing the scheme, one of the things which were being discussed, that what is the characteristic of these people for whom we are trying to design a scheme. And this is not very often done in government, that you try to see what is the characteristic of the beneficiary. But fortunately in this case, we thought, and we realized that there were three main characteristics of the people for whom we were trying to design something. One was they were poor, which is in the beginning, at least that was the idea, that they will be only poor population for whom we are designing the scheme. Which means we can't have something where people have to pay first and get reimbursed later, because then it defeats the whole purpose. Then they have to take loan, they have to sell their asset, because they have to pay the money at first at the time of treatment. So something has to be cashless. And cashless was not that an alien concept, because there are many cashless schemes in the world. In India also, there are lots of cashless examples. Second was that a lot of these people were illiterate. So if they have to fill lots of forms to get the benefit of the insurance, then it's a non-starter, because even for us it's a big nightmare to fill so many forms if we want to get the coverage from the insurance. So for a poor person, if he has to do, then of course nothing will happen for that person. So can we have a scheme which is a paperless scheme? That was another big idea which came, and that was something which the idea was that, can we design something where this person does not have to fill any form? Can it be a paperless? And third was that people are migrant a lot. For example, in Delhi, if you see the workers are there from Bihar, from UP, then if you go to any urban center, there are so many workers who are traveling from different places. And in most of the government scheme, the pity is that if you travel outside your place, you don't get the benefit. Like in the PDS, if you go outside your city, you can't get the ration until you get it transferred. It's a long process. For gas, you can't get it done. Even for something like NREGA scheme, you can't get the benefit outside your village, because everything is tied to something. And health is not something which you can tie, because health need can arise anytime. So that's why we said that third people are there migrant. So can we have a scheme which can be portable? So these are some things which were very important. And keeping these things in mind, the scheme was designed. Also in the beginning, since it was very new, and as very rightly said by Dr. Praneeth, that there was no data. So So we don't know what to include, what not to include. So what we said, let's include everything. We just keep a cap of the money, but below that almost everything is included except maybe suicide or nuclear or war or something. But almost everything was included. Now when you start getting more data, you can see that which things are actually not needed by people based on the data. Based on empirical analysis, then you can maybe eliminate some more things. In the beginning we said let's include everything. We just put a cap and then we see how it happens. The other biggest question when we were designing the scheme was when people said, there are no hospital, what will you do with giving a smart card to people because how they can access it? And this was a very genuine question. Now it's a chicken and egg situation. Because if they don't have the purchasing power, the providers are not very happy to come there because who will pay for them? And if the providers are there and people don't have purchasing power, then also it's not a viable proposition. What we said that as of now, if this person gets sick and he really needs treatment, he is going somewhere. Maybe he is going near to his house, maybe to the next city, to the next state, somewhere he will go for the treatment. At the first step, can I provide him something where wherever he goes, at least he doesn't have to pay? That is the first step. And if he doesn't have to pay, then it can happen that maybe the service quality and the providers will also come because then they see that there is a demand and can I meet the supply. And I'm very happy to share with you all that we have seen now indications that new providers are coming into rural areas to set up hospitals to say that now you're pumping 5 crore rupees in the district. I am setting up a hospital so that I can tap these patients because right now they're going to the next district. And this is something which is very encouraging, but we didn't thought that time. It was too big a thought for us. For us, it was just can I start something? Then the second point where we were struggling is that how we can actually try to design a scheme where we can harness the private sector. Because government, in spite of everything, has severe limitations in terms of capacity to implement things like this, in terms of even provide services, because the PHCs, CSCs and the government hospitals have limited number of people. They also have their own problems. And from past 60 years, 65 years, we are trying to improve them, and they have improved, I have no doubt, but there is still a long way to go. But the private sector is already there. Can we leverage them? And out of, for example, maybe more than 8,000 hospitals which are empaneled in the RCOI right now, almost 2/3 are private hospitals and nursing homes. So these hospitals and nursing homes are coming forward to do something which initially government thought that only they can do. And in this case, we are saying that it's not, any scheme, as rightly said, cannot run on charity. If you want to have a sustainable system, it has to be a business model. And in this scheme, for example, the idea was that for insurance company, it's a business model because they have to issue smart cards to people, they have to enroll them. So only the people who are authorized can be enrolled. And then the hospital, they have to treat patients. So as many patients come to them, they get as much money. And what we try to do, fix the cost of the procedures, so that hospital cannot charge whatever they want, so that there is a limit which is fixed, and if let's suppose if appendix operation is there, hospital will get only an X amount which is fixed, and they have to agree in advance, so that they also know that what is that amount, and that amount can be changed in different states based on the cost of the healthcare delivery in that particular state. So these are some things. Now this is just a kind of smart card which is issued to every family in the scheme. And this is the kind of kit which goes to each village. The biggest strength of the scheme, what we realized, that if we have to issue the smart card to people, we have to issue them on the spot. If you collect the data and then later on try to send the enrollment form or the smart card through post, then you never know whether it reaches the people or not. Even like when we get our credit card or something, we get it through post. We fill the form, it comes later. In the village or even in the slums, if you try to do that, you are sure that it will not reach the people, or if it tries to reach the people, there may be some cost associated with that later on. So we said it has to happen over the counter, and it was a huge task in the beginning. A team has to go to each village, and you have to collect the fingerprint, you have to print the card. I remember when we started first in Rajasthan, the temperature was 44 degrees in the summer, and the machine will not work. Nobody thought that machine can not work in the villages. So there were so many issues, but now things have improved. So, and as Siddharth was rightly saying, one of the major challenge, and still it's a challenge for RSBY, was that how to reach the people, because the data itself is wrong. So, if you go to the villages, maybe out of 100 people in a village who are in the BPL list, 30 does not exist even. So, even in spite of all your intention, you can't reach 100 people because 30 does not exist, 10 have moved, and the 60 which are left, maybe 5 are not interested in paying for something that they don't know, they have to pay 30 rupees. So even it was for the poor, at least they have to pay something, and this paying was very important for us because we wanted ownership from people. If people pay something, they will demand service. If they don't pay something, they will feel that, okay, this is coming something for free, so maybe it's not as valuable as it could be. So So this was something which was very important for us, that people have to pay. And in the first year people can pay, because this was something which was very unique to them, a smart card. For the first time in their life, they were getting a plastic card with a chip and the photograph and everything, so they were enamored by it. They were ready to pay 30 rupees just to get the card, forget insurance and everything. For them, that was a big thing. And they will come and they will take the card, and it works also as an ID card for them. They had never had an ID card. So they were very happy with that. But for us, the important point was that he will pay 30 rupees in the first year. He will not pay 30 rupees in the second year if he does not see any value in it. Because her first year, because of the new, we saw some people who had laminated this card. Now if you laminate it, the chip can't be read and this card will not work. We have seen in some houses that nailed the card on the wall because they thought this is something which looks very nice on the wall. But so that is why this whole issue what Siddharth raised was awareness. Even if you have the scheme, how to use it, you don't know about it. And second is that they will do all that in the first year. Now they have the card. So second year they will never pay 30 rupees because they know that I already have a card. So you have to see some value and some benefit. So if somebody in the village gets the benefit, somebody, my friend, gets the benefit, somebody whom I know in the nearer village who gets the benefit, then I have some trust that yes, in my need also it will help me because it has helped somebody else whom I know. So this was something which is very important. Now this is the current state of RSPY. We had been given a target of around 60 million families when we started around 4 years back. Now we have reached approximately 50% of that. So 28 million families have been covered. And the idea is now, yesterday I think in the parliament it was announced that the government wants to touch 70 million. But for me the important point is not the numbers. Numbers are fine, you can reach a certain level. The important point is whether the desired benefits are reaching the people or not, whether actually their out-of-pocket expenditure is coming down. And that's where it's very important. And we have seen at least that it is working up to decent level, that we have at least 10 evaluations have been done in different states. And out-of-pocket expenditure has come down for a lot of people. The access has certainly improved. According to NSSO, what Siddharth was mentioning, the average hospitalization rate was around 1.7% for the poorest 40% of the population. In RSPY, for the districts which have finished 2 years, it has reached to around 4 to 5%. So access has certainly improved. But what Dr. Pranit was saying, whether all those hospitalization was necessary, whether all those hospitalizations were already done or not, that is something that you have to work. But the good thing here is that the technology gives you the edge. And what the friend from the back was saying about the technology cannot be a double-edged sword. But in this case, if you use it judiciously, I can track every day which patient is going to which hospital, what is the treatment which is being prescribed to that patient, when he is admitted, when he is discharged. Every day I get this data. So whenever I have a doubt, if I am looking at the data closely, I can just send somebody to the hospital to check whether the patient is there or not, whether the treatment which is being provided is necessary or not. All this can be done because technology enables you to do this. But again, if you don't use the technology, if it's just lying there, the data is in a computer, you never look at it, then it does not help. And that's where the insurance company comes into picture, because they have the business interest to look at the data. Because if the claims are unnecessary, they lose the money. And this is where something which was very important. The last point here, which is there in this slide, is social identity to people is something I found really interesting. As I said, people were getting the smart card, people were getting the treatment. So I was in Jharkhand and we were in one of the villages trying to understand from people whether they're getting the benefit or not. So there was this very old lady, and she had the card and she got sick, so she was able to get the treatment. So she used to work as a bandhua mazdoor in the house of a zamindar, so as a bonded labor. So she was very happy that she was sick and she could get the treatment. But she was more happy, and she was telling very proudly that she could get the treatment in the same hospital where zamindar goes for the treatment. So for her, that was a very big thing, not the treatment part. Treatment part, she could have taken loan and got the treatment, but she could access the same hospital. And that was for her a huge thing. She was saying that, I could go to the same hospital. So, but again, as I said, there are so many challenges which are there, which we have to work on. Now, some things which I wanted to add here in the last slide. One is that outpatient is a major area. All these government schemes, RSBY and the state level schemes only cover inpatient. And inpatient is only maybe 30% of the total healthcare cost. But rest of the cost is outpatient. Many times you need medicine, you need some consultation. So what we were also aware that yes, this is something we have to work something on it. So what we have done now, we have started 2 experiments where around 1 million people are being covered to provide outpatient treatment linking with inpatient treatment of RSPY, where even a general practitioner has been empaneled in this scheme, a single general practitioner, and then he can actually provide consultation and medicine to people on a cashless basis linking with RSPY. And our idea is to start at least 7-8 more experiments in this year so that we have much better understanding in the data that how people are behaving, whether it is reducing the inpatient because you are trying to take care of the early stage, also whether it is reducing the out-of-pocket expenditure what we expect it should, and also that whether it is creating some other networks or some other incentive or disincentive which we have not thought of. We don't know. But we have started these, and interesting initial results are very encouraging. We have seen that inpatient has decreased in one of the districts out of 2 districts, but it's only 6-7 months, so I can't say too much. But it's very interesting. The idea is that when Siddharth was talking, that we should talk more because that's where there's much more scope for flexibility and innovativeness to design something which is it should not be same model everywhere, especially for outpatient, because this is something where based on the supply and based on the need of the people, it should be very innovative here also. So we are trying to test different models in different places, and then let's see how it works further. And as I think what Dr. Praneeth was saying also, that the policy part, that you can design all the best of the policies, but it can never work, and there are lots of people sitting. So I will end my presentation with a small story where there was this mouse who was stuck in a jungle somewhere. He was running around everywhere, and then he could not find his way out. So then he saw there was an owl sitting on the tree somewhere. So he asked the owl, "How can I go out from here? I'm stuck." So the owl said, "It's very easy. Grow wing and fly out." So he said, "How do I do that?" He said, "I make policy. I don't tell how to do it." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chan. I think the challenges which RSPY face is shared. And let me tell you, this monitoring part has been tremendously facilitated by technology. The one episode that he mentioned about a particular district, the data is being examined and monitored every day. So a particular area, a particular geography, a particular procedure was noticed to be done practically at every outlet. And when it was examined, a team was sent. There was no bad intent. There was no, I would say, trying to capitalize on the chip card fund available. It was a wrong sort of perception in the mind of the treating gynecologist that she was resorting to that particular treatment. She was given a one-day training on what are the current trends in treatment of that particular disease, and she realized her mistake, and thereafter it has dropped down. As he rightly pointed out, while the initial enrollment was more out of glamour and aura behind the card, but the rural folk are, I would say, as intelligent as the urban folk. They realize the importance of this card and they know how to utilize it. Now, what is the next step? There is a working group which is being constituted by IRDA, where the insurance company, health providers, and everybody, and Chamber of Commerce are the representatives, where the monitoring is being done. And in terms of assuring the quality, it was thought initially that NABH criteria would be applied, but then because the scheme had been started and when the facilities were enrolled, this was not a prerequisite, so obviously there was a lot of resistance. So actually this working group worked for almost 6 months to dilute the standards from the current NABH standards of second edition at that point in time for smaller facilities to an extent that they still remain realistic and serve the purpose, and they have been implemented and the monitoring is still going on. So far, the results have been, I would say, more on the positive side, and let us expect that with more and more number of people coming to know of these schemes and creating more and more awareness and creating a culture of health insurance is my birthright, probably will help resolve these kind of challenges. Thank you very much, Dr. Chan, and thank you very much, Dr. Siddharth. And thank you to the organizers for giving us the opportunity to express our views.
Thank you, our English speakers here on the dais. Now I request Mansi to give a thanks token to our speakers. Dr. Praneeth Kumar. Thank you, sir, for beautifully conducting the session. And Dr. Nishan Jain. And Dr. Siddharth Agarwal. Thank you, everybody. Now we'll soon start with our next session. After a 10-minute tea break, 10 minutes just to take your tea, you can come have your tea inside the hall only, and we may start with the session soon. I request all of you